The prime rib on my plate was still steaming when the ground fell out from under me. Medium rare, perfectly seared on the edges, accompanied by roasted asparagus that I had not even managed to taste yet. My fork was halfway to my mouth, suspended in the dimly lit, oak-paneled dining room of one of the most exclusive steakhouses in the city. We were seated at a long mahogany table, surrounded by the top brass of Apex Transit and our three biggest enterprise clients. The atmosphere was thick with the smell of expensive wine and the low hum of corporate self-congratulation. It was supposed to be a victory dinner. We had just closed the largest logistics contract of the fiscal year, securing a massive multi-state freight lane. And then Bradley Thorne, the chief operating officer, and a man who wore his arrogance like tailored wool, pushed his chair back and stood up. He held a crystal glass of bourbon in his right hand, tapping it lightly with a silver spoon until the quiet chatter around the table died down, completely. Bradley smiled, a wide predatory grin that stretched across his face as he looked from client to client. "We did it," he announced, his voice carrying over the ambient noise of the restaurant. "The biggest regional optimization rollout this company has ever seen." Everyone at our table clapped. A few of the younger account managers at the far end even cheered. I offered a polite nod, chewing on a piece of bread, fully expecting him to propose a toast to the clients, and sit back down so we could eat in peace. "My engineering team," Bradley continued, his tone shifting slightly, taking on an edge that I had learned to recognize over the past 4 years, has been essential to this milestone. "Well, most of them have been." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the faces of the executives before locking directly onto mine. "Some pieces of the machine just do not fit where we are heading. Sometimes you have to cut the dead weight before it drags the entire operation down into the mud." A few people chuckled nervously, assuming it was one of Bradley's trademark abrasive jokes, but the laughter evaporated into a suffocating silence when his eyes stayed fixed on me. "Nolan Vance," he said, his voice cold and loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear, "is no longer with Apex Transit." Effective immediately, the silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of quiet that felt physically heavy, pressing down on my chest and making it difficult to draw breath. The ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away into a distant blur. The clinking of silverware, the murmur of conversations, the soft jazz playing through the overhead speakers. It all vanished, leaving only the ringing in my ears. "He is a brilliant technician," Bradley added, speaking about me in the third person, as if I were a ghost haunting the chair. "But he lacks the vision required for our next phase of aggressive expansion. We need modern acceleration, not legacy friction." I did not move. My hand remained frozen in the air, still gripping the heavy silver fork. My mind struggled to process the reality of the moment. I was 54 years old. I had dedicated the last 7 years of my life to building the core routing architecture that kept Apex Transit from collapsing under its own operational inefficiencies. I had sacrificed evenings, weekends, and holidays writing the code that they were now using to secure their multi-million-dollar contracts. And now I was being publicly discarded like a piece of defective equipment. I slowly lowered my fork to the plate, the metallic clink echoing sharply in the quiet space. I looked down the length of the table, searching for a single friendly face. Maya from the compliance department stared intently at her napkin, refusing to meet my eyes. Julian, the lead infrastructure developer I had mentored for 3 years, suddenly found his water glass fascinating. Even the clients looked incredibly uncomfortable, shifting in their leather seats as if they had accidentally walked into a domestic dispute. "Let us raise a glass to the future," Bradley declared smoothly, lifting his bourbon toward the ceiling. "To momentum and to leaving the past behind." I did not raise my glass. I pushed my chair back slowly, the wooden legs scraping loudly against the polished floorboards. My legs felt hollow, as if they were made of water, but I forced myself to stand tall. I had no intention of giving Bradley the satisfaction of seeing me break. I grabbed my coat from the back of the chair and turned to leave. "Excuse me." The voice did not come from our table. It cut through the tension from a smaller, more intimate booth situated a few feet away. I stopped and turned. A man in a sharply tailored charcoal suit was sitting alone, swirling a glass of sparkling water. He had silver hair brushed back neatly and eyes that looked like they had seen every variation of human desperation and greed. "Are you the engineer who designed the dynamic predictive routing protocol presented at the Seattle Summit 2 years ago?" he asked, his tone steady and commanding. I stared at him, momentarily disoriented by the interruption. "Yes," I replied, my voice sounding rough and unfamiliar to my own ears. The man nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, pulled out a thick, textured business card, and slid it across the smooth wooden surface of his table until it rested near the edge. "Preston Cole, Zenith Capital," he said quietly. I recognized the name immediately. Everyone in the tech and logistics sector knew who Preston Cole was. He was a billionaire venture capitalist, a man known for spotting undervalued technological assets and turning them into industry titans. "Deadweight does not build mathematical models like yours," Preston said, his eyes flicking briefly toward Bradley, who was now standing frozen with his glass still in the air. "My office, 9 in the morning, do not be late." He did not wait for a response. He simply went back to his drink. I looked down at the heavy card resting on the edge of his table. The embossed letters caught the dim light of the restaurant. I picked it up, slipping it into my pocket without a word. I did not look back at Bradley. I did not look at my former colleagues. I walked out of the steakhouse and out into the crisp evening air, my heart pounding a steady, furious rhythm against my ribs. The humiliation was still burning in my chest, but as my fingers brushed against the heavy stock of the business card in my pocket, a new, much colder feeling began to take root. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the darkness of my living room, the city lights casting long, distorted shadows across the hardwood floor. The heavy business card rested on the coffee table in front of me, practically glowing in the dim light. My phone buzzed incessantly for the first few hours. Messages from colleagues pretending to be sympathetic poured into my inbox. "Sorry about how that went down," one read. "Let me know if you need a recommendation," said another. They were empty words from people who had lacked the spine to speak up when it actually mattered. I ignored all of them. Instead, I opened my personal laptop and pulled up the archived schematics of the predictive routing protocol I had designed 3 years earlier. It was the raw, uncorrupted version of the system, before Bradley and the executive board forced me to dilute the algorithms to fit their legacy hardware. By the time the sun began to rise, painting the Chicago skyline in shades of pale gray and orange, I had reviewed every line of the core logic. The math was flawless. The execution had been compromised by poor management, but the foundation was mine, and it was bulletproof. At 8 in the morning, I showered, put on a sharp navy suit, and caught a cab to the financial district. Zenith Capital occupied the top 3 floors of a towering glass monolith overlooking the river. The lobby was an exercise in minimalist intimidation. Acres of polished white marble, silent security personnel, and an atmosphere that smelled faintly of ozone and money. I approached the reception desk and gave my name. The receptionist did not ask for an appointment. She simply handed me a sleek, black security badge and directed me to the private elevator. The doors opened directly onto the 44th floor, revealing a sprawling, open-plan office space bathed in natural light. Preston Cole was waiting for me in a corner office that looked less like a corporate workspace and more like a high-tech command center. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, hands clasped behind his back, watching the morning traffic crawl along the streets far below. He did not turn around immediately as I entered. "Apex Transit is running on borrowed time," Preston said, his voice echoing slightly in the large room. He turned and gestured for me to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. I took a seat, keeping my posture rigid. "I have been watching their infrastructure metrics for the past 18 months, he continued, sitting across from me and leaning forward. "They are patching over foundational cracks with expensive Band-Aids. Their new multi-state rollout? The one your former boss was celebrating so enthusiastically last night? It is going to buckle under its own weight within 6 months. How do you know that?" I asked, genuinely surprised by the depth of his intelligence gathering. "Because I know what they stripped out of your original design to make it deployable on their outdated servers," he replied smoothly. He tapped a sleek tablet on his desk, bringing up a complex flowchart that looked hauntingly familiar. It was my routing protocol, reverse-engineered and analyzed down to the microsecond. They took your engine, put it in a broken chassis, and fired the only mechanic who knew how to keep it from exploding. "So why am I here?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. "I want you to build it again," Preston said, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that demanded absolute focus. "But this time, you build it the right way. No compromises, no corporate red tape. I will provide unlimited funding, top-tier server architecture, and complete autonomy. We set up an invisible unlisted shell company. You operate entirely in the shadows. You build the perfect predictive logistics platform, and we wait. Wait for what? For Apex Transit to suffocate," he said coldly. "When their patched-together system inevitably crashes, their clients will panic. They will look for a lifeline. And we will be the only ones standing there, holding a platform that can handle the load seamlessly." The proposition was dangerous, thrilling, and bordered on corporate warfare. It was exactly what I needed. "What is the catch?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. "The catch is that you do not exist," Preston replied. "No press releases, no LinkedIn updates, no marketing campaigns. You will be a ghost until the precise moment we are ready to strike. You cannot tell anyone outside of your immediate, trusted circle what you are doing. If Apex Transit catches wind of this before we are operational, they will bury you in frivolous litigation just to stall your progress." I looked down at the tablet, staring at the elegant logic of my original code. The humiliation from the steakhouse still burned, but it was rapidly being replaced by a cold, calculated drive. "I am in," I said softly. "Good," Preston nodded, pulling a thick leather binder from his drawer. "We are incorporating Zenith Logistics as of this morning. You are the chief executive and lead architect. Now, who do you need to make this happen?" I did not even have to think about it. "I need Maya, Julian, and Zara," I said, listing the core engineers who had been systematically sidelined or pushed out by Bradley's toxic management style over the past year. Maya was the most brilliant database architect in my professional history. Julian was a prodigy in real-time server optimization. Zara was a brilliant cybersecurity specialist who had quit Apex Transit 3 months ago out of sheer disgust with their security protocols. "Get them," Preston instructed, sliding a heavy envelope across the desk. It contained banking details, encrypted communication devices, and the keys to an unmarked office space in the industrial district. Pay them double whatever Apex Transit was giving them. Tell them the truth, but swear them to absolute secrecy. By 3 in the afternoon, I was standing in a stark, empty warehouse space that smelled of fresh paint and industrial floor cleaner. The windows were frosted, the doors reinforced with steel, and the internet connection was a direct, heavily encrypted fiber line. Maya, Julian, and Zara arrived one by one over the next 2 hours. I had called them from a secure line, offering no details, other than a promise that I was building something real and that I needed the best. When they were all gathered around a makeshift folding table in the center of the room, I laid out the plan. I told them about the humiliating firing, the encounter with Preston Cole, and the massive financial backing of Zenith Capital. Most importantly, I told them we were going to build the system Apex Transit was too blind to appreciate, and we were going to use it to render them entirely obsolete. Zara grinned, leaning back in her chair and crossing her arms. "So, we are building the Death Star of logistics platforms?" she asked, her eyes gleaming with chaotic excitement. "Exactly," I replied, unrolling a large sheet of paper across the table and pulling out a marker. "And we have exactly 5 months to make it fully operational before Apex Transit's infrastructure tears itself apart. Let us get to work." The silence in the room was replaced by the frantic, exhilarating energy of creation. We were no longer employees bound by the suffocating ignorance of a bureaucratic nightmare. We were architects with a singular, destructive purpose, and the clock had just started ticking. The next 4 months were a blur of caffeine, encrypted data streams, and unrelenting focus. We practically lived in the unmarked warehouse space, isolated from the outside world and insulated by the massive financial shield provided by Preston Cole. Zenith Logistics was taking shape, lines of elegant code transforming into a massive, breathing digital infrastructure. Maya constructed database arrays that could handle terabytes of incoming geospatial data, without a millisecond of lag. Julian aggressively optimized the server-side processing, stripping out any unnecessary latency until the routing queries executed almost instantaneously. Zara wrapped the entire architecture in a cryptographic fortress, ensuring that our operations remained completely invisible to any external tracking or corporate espionage. We operated with military precision. There were no bureaucratic meetings, no marketing strategy sessions, and absolutely no interference from middle management. We simply built the most sophisticated predictive logistics engine the industry had ever seen. The system was designed to dynamically reroute massive freight convoys in real time, anticipating weather patterns, traffic anomalies, and mechanical failures before they even occurred. It was everything I had originally envisioned at Apex Transit, magnified and perfected by a team that finally had the freedom to execute without compromise. As we fortified our infrastructure, we kept a close, silent watch on our former employer. Through secure monitoring channels and anonymous industry forums, we watched the slow, agonizing unraveling of Apex Transit. It started with minor disruptions. A delayed shipment of industrial components in the Midwest. A routing error that sent 3 freight trucks in the wrong direction across the state lines. But within 8 weeks of my departure, the cracks in their foundation began to splinter into massive structural failures. Their highly publicized multi-state expansion was proving to be a logistical nightmare. The diluted algorithms they had forced onto my original framework could not handle the exponential increase in real-time data inputs. The system was choking on its own complexity. We monitored the chaos from our secure warehouse, watching the industry dashboards light up with red warning indicators as Apex Transit's efficiency metrics plummeted by over 30%. Bradley Thorne was reportedly losing his mind. Industry rumors, filtered through anonymous corporate back channels, painted a picture of a chief operating officer in full panic mode. He was firing junior developers left and right, desperately trying to find a scapegoat for the cascading failures of his flagship routing network. He ordered his remaining engineers to apply frantic software patches, which only served to introduce new critical bugs into the fragile ecosystem. The most catastrophic failure occurred during a brutal winter storm that swept across the northern states. The Apex Transit routing system failed to anticipate the severe road closures, resulting in millions of dollars worth of perishable goods spoiling while trapped in stranded, unpowered transport trucks. The industry was bleeding, and the major logistics clients were quietly desperate for an alternative. They needed stability, predictability, and above all, they needed an infrastructure that would not collapse under pressure. That was when Preston Cole gave the order to initiate a soft launch. We did not issue a press release. We did not launch a flashy website or hire a public relations firm. We simply reached out through Preston's extensive, highly secure network of corporate contacts and offered a closed-door demonstration to 3 of the most disgruntled enterprise clients currently suffering under Apex Transit's failing system. The meetings were held in secure boardrooms, far away from the prying eyes of industry journalists. The pitch was remarkably simple. We did not promise them abstract synergy or disruptive innovation. We simply connected our proprietary Zenith logistics engine to their live operational data feeds and told them to watch. Within 10 minutes, our predictive models had identified 17 critical routing inefficiencies in their current active lanes. We demonstrated how our system would have proactively rerouted their assets to avoid a massive traffic gridlock that had cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars just 2 days prior. The results were mathematically undeniable. The clients were stunned into absolute silence. By the end of the second week of our soft launch, all 3 enterprise clients had signed massive, multi-year contracts with Zenith Logistics. They quietly initiated the legal protocols to terminate their agreements with Apex Transit, citing severe breaches of service-level guarantees and critical infrastructure instability. The migration of their data to our servers was executed flawlessly in the middle of the night. When they woke up the next morning, their fleets were being guided by our algorithms, operating with a level of efficiency they had not seen in years. Back in the warehouse, the atmosphere was electric but distinctly subdued. There was no champagne, no loud celebrations. We simply watched the live monitoring screens as our system effortlessly managed the massive influx of data. The green indicators blinked steadily, a silent testament to the superiority of our engineering. We had proven that our architecture was flawless, but we knew the real war was just beginning. Apex Transit was hemorrhaging capital and clients at an alarming rate. It did not take long for Bradley Thorne and his panicked executive board to realize that their biggest contracts were not just dissolving. They were migrating to a ghost entity that possessed an unnervingly perfect routing system. They began running aggressive digital traces, desperately trying to uncover the identity of the mysterious competitor that was quietly dismantling their empire. Zara detected their initial probing attempts almost immediately. She sat back in her chair, a grim smile playing across her lips as she watched the Apex Transit security algorithms bounce harmlessly off our encrypted firewalls. "They are looking for us," she announced, her fingers flying across her mechanical keyboard to reinforce the perimeter. "They are scared, and they are looking for someone to blame." "Let them look," I said, staring hard at the main diagnostic display. I knew Bradley better than anyone. He was a man driven by ego and a desperate need to maintain control. When he realized he could not defeat us technologically, he would inevitably resort to the only other weapon he understood. He would try to crush us with legal intimidation. But this time, we were not vulnerable employees trapped in his corporate hierarchy. We were an autonomous, heavily fortified entity, and we were fully prepared for the strike. 3 days later, the strike arrived. It did not come in the form of a cyber attack or an industry smear campaign. It came in the form of a heavy, certified legal document delivered directly to the registered address of Zenith Capital. The corporate war had officially shifted from the servers to the courtroom, and I was more than ready to engage. The cease and desist letter arrived via certified mail, a thick stack of aggressively worded legal threats bound in heavy corporate parchment. It was delivered directly to Preston Cole's desk at Zenith Capital, bypassing our secure warehouse entirely. Preston summoned me to his office immediately. When I walked through the heavy glass doors, he was sitting across from a woman I had never met before. She had sharp, calculating eyes and wore a tailored gray suit that screamed expensive litigation. "Nolan," Preston said, his voice calm and completely devoid of the panic one might expect when facing a multi-million-dollar corporate lawsuit. "Meet Sylvia Reed. She is the lead corporate litigator for our firm, and she is going to dismantle your former employer." I took a seat, glancing down at the document resting on the polished mahogany table. The header bore the unmistakable logo of Apex Transit. The accusations were as predictable as they were severe. They claimed gross misappropriation of trade secrets, intellectual property theft, and industrial sabotage. They demanded the immediate shutdown of all Zenith logistics operations and the total surrender of our source code. Bradley Thorne had clearly convinced his board of directors that I had stolen their proprietary algorithms and weaponized them to steal their clients. Sylvia adjusted her glasses and tapped the thick stack of paper with a silver pen. "This is a classic desperation tactic," she said, her voice crisp and authoritative. "They are bleeding capital, their infrastructure is collapsing, and their shareholders are demanding answers. They need a villain to blame for their own catastrophic mismanagement. They are hoping to bury us in injunctions and bleed us dry with legal fees until we are forced to settle." "They are claiming I stole the core routing engine," I said, leaning forward and crossing my arms. "But the system they are running is a corrupted fraction of my original design. And the architecture we built here at Zenith Logistics was written from the ground up. Not a single line of their code exists on our servers." "I am well aware of that," Sylvia replied smoothly. "But defending ourselves against their baseless claims is a reactive strategy. We do not play defense. We are going to strike them where they are most vulnerable, using federal law as our bludgeon." She pulled a massive, meticulously organized binder from her briefcase and opened it, revealing hundreds of pages of printed emails, architectural diagrams, and corporate contracts. "During your tenure at Apex Transit," Sylvia began, "you developed the initial mathematical models for the predictive routing engine on your own time, using your personal equipment, long before they formally integrated it into their corporate roadmap. Is that correct?" Yes, I confirmed. I spent almost 2 years refining the logic on my personal workstation before I ever presented it to the executive board. Sylvia smiled, a thin, dangerous expression. Under Title 35 of the United States Code, Section 271, patent infringement requires the unauthorized use of a patented invention. But Apex Transit never formally patented your original architecture. Instead, they relied on a standard employment intellectual property assignment clause to claim ownership of your work. She slid a photocopy of a signed contract across the table. It was an intellectual property assignment agreement dated from my second year at the company. My signature was scrawled at the bottom, granting Apex Transit full rights to any software developed during my employment. But there was a glaring problem. I stared at the signature, a cold wave of realization washing over me. I never signed this document, I said quietly, tracing the ink with my finger. The loops on the letters are entirely wrong. I was in a hospital recovering from a minor surgery on the date this was supposedly executed. Bingo, Sylvia said, her eyes gleaming with predatory satisfaction. We ran a thorough forensic analysis on the document they submitted in their discovery filing. The signature is a digital forgery. Someone within Apex Transit Management, likely under immense pressure to secure the intellectual property rights before launching their multi-state expansion, falsified your signature. Under state penal codes regarding forgery, this renders their entire claim to your intellectual property completely void ab initio. The contract is legally non-existent. The implications were staggering. If Apex Transit did not own the underlying intellectual property, their entire operational framework was built on stolen, unassigned assets. They were not the victims of intellectual property theft. They were the perpetrators. But we are not stopping there, Sylvia continued, flipping to another section of the binder. We are also filing a massive federal complaint against Bradley Thorne and the executive board for severe breach of fiduciary duty. We have secured encrypted communications from internal whistleblowers, proving that Bradley knowingly deployed a critically unstable routing system, intentionally ignored security warnings from your former engineering team, and actively falsified operational metrics to deceive their corporate shareholders. He committed gross corporate fraud to inflate the company valuation right before their massive expansion. They thought they could crush us quietly. Preston interjected, his voice cold and hard as steel. We are going to drag their fraudulent practices into the blinding light of the public arena. Over the next 48 hours, Sylvia executed a legal bombardment of unprecedented scale. We did not merely respond to their cease and desist. We filed a colossal countersuit in federal court, citing egregious intellectual property theft, corporate forgery, and systemic shareholder fraud. We demanded hundreds of millions of dollars in punitive damages and sought an immediate federal injunction to freeze Apex Transit's operational assets pending a full forensic audit of their servers. But the legal filings were only the first phase of the assault. Preston leveraged his massive network of media contacts to ensure that the lawsuit did not remain buried in the dense dockets of the federal court system. He systematically leaked the details of the forged intellectual property contracts and the falsified operational metrics to 3 major financial news outlets simultaneously. The resulting explosion was catastrophic for our former employer. When the financial markets opened the following Monday, the news of the massive federal lawsuit and the allegations of severe executive fraud had already saturated the corporate news cycle. Apex Transit's stock price went into an immediate, violent freefall. Within 3 hours of the opening bell, their market valuation plummeted by over 40%. Trading had to be halted twice to prevent a total market panic, but the damage was irreversible. The corporate giant that had so arrogantly discarded me in that dimly lit steakhouse was now bleeding out on the public stage, its fraudulent foundation collapsing under the crushing weight of its own deception. The implosion of Apex Transit was swift, brutal, and remarkably public. Once the federal lawsuit became front-page news, the carefully constructed facade of corporate invincibility completely shattered. The revelations of forged intellectual property contracts and intentionally falsified operational metrics triggered a massive wave of panic among their remaining clients. Within 72 hours of the initial financial market plunge, 5 of their largest regional carriers officially terminated their contracts, citing catastrophic breaches of trust and critical infrastructure instability. The routing network that they had stolen from me was fundamentally broken, and now the entire industry knew that its foundation was built on lies. The final blow came on a crisp Tuesday morning, exactly 5 months after I had been unceremoniously fired in that crowded steakhouse. The board of directors at Apex Transit, desperate to salvage whatever fragments of value remained in their plummeting stock, convened an emergency session. Bradley Thorne, the man who had orchestrated the theft of my architecture and gleefully humiliated me in front of my peers, was stripped of his title as Chief Operating Officer and forcibly removed from the corporate headquarters by armed security personnel. The scene was captured by several ambitious business reporters who had staked out the building, their cameras flashing relentlessly as Bradley was escorted into the cold morning air, clutching a cardboard box of his personal belongings. He looked pale, disheveled, and completely broken, but the nightmare for Apex Transit was far from over. Sylvia Reed's meticulous legal assault had attracted the attention of federal regulators. Later that same week, agents from the Federal Trade Commission and the Securities Exchange Commission arrived at the Apex Transit offices with comprehensive warrants. They seized dozens of servers, hundreds of hard drives, and thousands of pages of internal communications, searching for the digital footprints of the forgery and the massive shareholder fraud we had exposed. The company was paralyzed, its operations frozen under the immense weight of the federal investigations. Facing insurmountable legal fees, massive client exodus, and billions of dollars in potential punitive damages, Apex Transit formally filed for corporate bankruptcy less than 3 weeks later. With our former adversary utterly obliterated, the time for shadows and secrecy had passed. Preston Cole decided it was time to officially unveil Zenith Logistics to the world. We did not rent a lavish hotel ballroom or throw an extravagant corporate party. Instead, we hosted a highly exclusive press conference in the soaring glass atrium of the Zenith Capitol building, inviting only top-tier technology journalists and the chief executives of the most powerful freight companies in the nation. I stood off to the side wearing a dark, perfectly tailored suit, watching the room fill with industry titans. Maya, Julian, and Zara stood beside me, their faces reflecting a mixture of exhaustion and profound, quiet pride. We had spent the last several months working in absolute secrecy, pouring every ounce of our intellect and endurance into a system that had just single-handedly dismantled a corporate giant. Preston stepped up to the minimalist podium, the flash of cameras reflecting off his silver hair. He did not waste time with grand corporate platitudes or lengthy marketing speeches. The logistics industry has suffered for years under the weight of outdated infrastructure and arrogant, stagnant leadership. Preston began, his voice projecting clearly across the silent atrium. Today, that era officially ends. We are not introducing a patch or a minor upgrade. We are introducing the absolute standard in dynamic, predictive freight routing. He gestured toward the massive digital display behind him, which flared to life, showing the live, real-time routing nodes of the Zenith Logistics network. Thousands of active freight lanes were pulsing across the map of the country, moving with flawless, uninterrupted precision. The system was handling millions of data points every second, predicting weather delays, circumventing traffic bottlenecks, and optimizing fuel consumption with mathematical perfection. The executives in the audience stared at the screen in stunned silence, recognizing the sheer, undeniable power of the architecture. But the technology is only half of the story, Preston continued, turning his gaze toward where I was standing. A system of this magnitude requires an architect with unparalleled vision, a man who was told his ideas were obsolete by individuals who lacked the capacity to comprehend them. He gestured for me to step forward. Ladies and gentlemen, the Chief Executive Officer and Lead Architect of Zenith Logistics, Nolan Vance. I walked toward the podium, the sound of my footsteps echoing softly against the marble floor. I looked out over the crowd of journalists and corporate leaders. Some of them had been in that steakhouse 5 months ago. Some of them had laughed when Bradley called me dead weight. Now they were looking at me with a profound mixture of awe and nervous respect. I stepped up to the microphone and gripped the edges of the podium. I did not smile. I did not offer a dramatic speech about revenge or justice. They told me my architecture was a failure, I said, my voice steady and cold, echoing through the massive space. I did not argue with them. I simply built the system they swore could not be built. The network you see behind me is not a prototype. It is currently managing the logistics of 7 major national carriers, with absolute stability. We are Zenith Logistics, and we are just getting started. I stepped back from the microphone as the room erupted into a deafening storm of applause and flashing cameras. Preston clapped me firmly on the shoulder, a rare, genuine smile breaking across his face. Down in the front row, Maya, Julian, and Zara were cheering, the validation of our grueling, secretive labor finally realized. Later that evening, long after the press conference had ended and the journalists had gone home to write their headlines, I found myself standing alone by the massive windows in my new corner office. The city stretched out below me, an endless ocean of glittering lights and moving vehicles, all flowing through the complex arteries of the urban landscape. Somewhere in that sprawling metropolis, Bradley Thorne was sitting in disgrace, his career destroyed and his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale of corporate fraud and catastrophic arrogance. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the cool, conditioned air fill my lungs. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the heavy, textured business card that Preston Cole had slid across the table all those months ago. I pulled it out and stared at the embossed lettering, remembering the paralyzing humiliation of that dinner and the absolute silence of my former colleagues. I walked over to the sleek, empty trash bin beside my desk and let the card slip from my fingers. I did not need the reminder anymore. The ghost of Apex Transit was dead and buried. The system was running flawlessly. The victory was absolute, cold, and entirely my own.